What's up, everyone? Today we're going to get started talking about Terraform. We'll go over exactly what is Terraform, how to get it installed on your system, and then create your first configuration, just creating files on your local system. You don't have to worry about connecting to a cloud provider or anything like that. We're going to keep it very simple and just give you a very good introduction here. As always, this code is available out in my GitHub repository. I will include a link to it down in the video description below. My name is Jeff. This is Jeff Brown Tech. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's go and first get started talking about what exactly is Terraform. I'm not going to do a super in-depth discussion on it, just highlight a couple of key points. Then we'll go into how to install Terraform on your system and then create our first configuration. So the big thing is Terraform is an infrastructure as code language from HashiCorp. It lets you define, provision, and manage infrastructure in a declarative way. Now, what does that mean exactly in a declarative way? What I want you to think about is maybe you're working in something like vSphere or out in a cloud provider like AWS or Azure, and you could go through the portal and create a resource like a storage account, a network, a virtual machine. You click through it and do all those things, but it is time consuming. You have to remember exactly what you have to select there, what settings. Maybe you do something a little different than another coworker that you're working with, and it just leads to inconsistencies. You could also write a bash or a PowerShell script or something like that that will go through and create your resource. And maybe it standardizes a couple of things and might produce the same result. But that same script also has to go through and verify, or let's say you're running it and it fails and you try to run it again. The script has to be able to have the logic in it that goes and realizes, oh, you already created the virtual machine, but maybe the networking isn't set up. And you just have to build in a lot of logic to handle those scenarios, if it failed or something the first time, or you need to reconfigure it. What we mean by infrastructure code in a declarative way, that is you define what you want your resource to look like. Let's say I want a virtual machine with this many CPUs and memory. It's going to have one network card with these disks on it. And then you take that declaration or definition that you just created and you send it to something, and it takes all those inputs and creates it for you, creates it consistently, creates it the same way. And then maybe partway through it failed creating part of it, you can just submit that again and it goes, oh, your VM exists, but your data disks don't. Let me go ahead and finish provisioning that for you. It's a better way to manage your resources and infrastructure because you can take something that you've defined and apply it again, and it should be consistent and give you the same thing every time. A great thing about it is the repeatability. I can take a definition maybe I have for a virtual machine, and let's say I need to create another one just like it. You just change the name of the virtual machine, you submit that code or that definition again, and it creates another virtual machine just like it, but with a different name. Terraform has support for hundreds of providers, something like providers for Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, GitHub. There's lots of things out there. I think there's even one for something like Domino's where you can write out your pizza order as code and a definition and submit it. I've never actually tried that. I just always hear about it. But these providers extend the capabilities of native Terraform so you can work in those different environments and different products to define what you want things to look like. You submit it, and then it goes and creates it for you. When we're working specifically with Terraform, we're going to see lots of things with .tf configuration files. TF stands for Terraform. We'll see more of that as we get further into writing out our definition and our configurations. Going back through in this video, let's get started about installing Terraform. We'll create a Terraform project. We're going to add resources to it and then run commands for our Terraform workflow. Now, when we talk about installing Terraform, it really is, in this case, just downloading an executable or a binary, putting it on your system, and then adding that path or adding the path to that executable to your path variable. The Terraform command is recognized across your system wherever you run it. First, I do have a link right here that goes out to HashiCorp documentation on how to install Terraform for lots of different scenarios, operating systems, etc. Let's go ahead and jump over to that website and take a look. Here we are at the Install Terraform webpage and their documentation. First, we have here for macOS, there's Package Manager where you can use the brew command to install it, or you can just manually download the binary here. For Windows, we just have downloading the binary also. I do believe it is available through Chocolatey, but that's community maintained and it might not always be the latest version or something like that. If you always want to make sure you have the latest version, just come out here to the documentation, install it. We have a x86 and a 64-bit version here. And then for Linux, we have different package managers, Ubuntu, Debian, Red Hat, Fedora, Amazon Linux, all those different ones where you can download and install it. And then they have some additional commands here for, I think, supporting, the certificate and everything to download it. FreeBSD, OpenBSD, Solaris, whatever operating system you're running, you should be covered here. Now, it's not enough to just download it, especially for something like Windows. You need to make sure you add the download location or where the executable exists to your path variable. That way, wherever you run the command, that command is recognized on your system. Back out here in our README in our GitHub repository here, I do have instructions on how to do that for different operating systems. We're going to stick with Windows right now just because that's the system I'm on and I can show it to you here. What you want to do is go to your control panel, look for advanced system settings, environment variables, edit your path and add the folder containing your terraform.exe. Maybe put it at the root of your C drive or under program files. Let's actually go take a look and see where I have it out on my system. Here I have my system properties. Let's go into environment variables. Now you'll notice there are user variables and then system variables. I think the general practice is to put it under your system variables. That way it is available to anyone who signs into your system. In my case though, I do just have it under my user variables. If we go under path here, and then we take a look here under my user profile, I have a .terraform folder, and that's where my executable exists. If you are making this change and adding it into your system path, you may need to restart your shell that you're using. So I think when the shell starts up, that's when it looks to see what executables are available inside of its path. Let me just open up inside here Visual Studio Code. Let's run terraform-version, and this will come back and tell you your version and what binary version you're running. Also Windows AMD 64 will give you a notice here if you're out of date with the latest version. I'm just a couple of very hotfix patches away or minor versions like that away. So I'm good with this right now. If you run Terraform version, it comes back and says Terraform does not, validate or it is an unrecognized command. Go ahead, restart your shell, try it again, and double check your system path to make sure the correct path is in there where you've downloaded your Terraform executable. Okay, so let's go ahead. We should have that all good to go here. Let's go ahead and create our first project. If you've downloaded this repository, I do have the start of it right here under TF demo and then main.tf. But if you want to anywhere on your local system, go ahead and create your folder, create a file named main.tf. Once you have your TF demo folder created and your main.tf file created, go ahead and copy and paste all of this code in there. Let's just go over it real quick. First, when you're working inside Terraform code, you always need a Terraform block here. It defines a couple of different things. The first thing we're going to look at is just the required version. This is the required version of the Terraform binary that you just downloaded. You can sit there and say this code or this configuration that we're creating requires this minimum version. There are improvements and changes in what that executable supports here. In this case, I'm saying greater than or equal to 1.0. We just saw, I think I'm at 1.13. So that will be good here. Then as you're working with your providers, you can put in a placeholder for your provider configuration. In this case, we're going to be working with a provider called local. And then here's an example resource called local file. Example, the content of our file is going to say hello Terraform. I might have a slightly different example inside the code over here. We'll take a look at that in a second. And then what do we want our file name to be? Here we have a variable that's going to expand where we're creating our Terraform code. So in this case, it will be the TF demo folder here. And the name of our file is going to be hello.txt. Again, very quickly going through that, I think the main things are to understand is you have a Terraform block. If you're working with any providers, you'll have provider blocks for each of those, and then defining your resources. Let's talk a little bit more about defining resources. The resource block is a way to describe some type of real world object. It could be a file, maybe a virtual machine or storage account, something just you're working with that you want to provision. And it's telling Terraform that you need to either create this, you need to update it, or maybe even need to delete it based on where it is in the resource lifecycle. There are a couple of different components when defining resource. We have the resource keyword telling Terraform you're creating a resource. First part of this inside of quotes is going to be your provider type. What type of resource are you creating within the provider that you're using? And then you're giving that resource a name. Now, this is not going to be the actual name of a resource. This is what you're calling it inside of Terraform. And the full resource name, I call it an alias. I don't know if there's any official name, that you would use to describe it, but it's going to be the full part here. So the provider name and then kind of the canonical name or alias that you're giving it inside of Terraform. Hopefully this will make a little more sense. So just bear with me as we get further inside of this example here. Then every different resource is going to have different properties that you can define with it. In that case, that's going to go in between our curly brackets here. And again, let's go back through and now apply this to what we looked at in our example code. We have the resource keyword. We're working with the local provider and we're creating a file. I'm calling that example inside of Terraform. So my full resource name that I'll use inside of Terraform that's unique is going to be localfile.example. We then have content, and these are the different properties that we can define for our local file name, and our content. Now, as you're defining these resources and you actually deploy them, each resource is going to correspond to an actual object tracked inside of Terraform's state file. This is how Terraform keeps up with what it should be provisioning or managing compared to what is actually deployed or created out in your environment. We'll go into state files a little bit more, probably in some upcoming videos. Once you've got your configuration defined and good to go, there is something called the Terraform Workflow. It's a set of commands that you go through to make sure you've got everything in your Terraform ready to go. You can see the changes that it's going to make and then also apply them and delete them. The first command we're going to take a look at is Terraform init. This initializes your working directory. It's going to make sure everything is good to go there. It's going to download any providers that you're going to be using. You then use Terraform plan. This will show you the changes that Terraform is going to make based on your configuration and then what actually exists out in your environment. You then do Terraform apply. That's going to execute your plan and go create the infrastructure, the objects, whatever you're working with. And then you can run Terraform destroy. It's going to then go remove everything you've defined inside your configuration, and it'll just go delete it all for you. All right, enough talk of this here. Let's actually jump out into our example here, take a look at the code and run through our workflow. Again, you can use the example I have here inside of GitHub or go create your own folder and file here. Let's go ahead and open up main.tf. You'll see a little bit extra code because we're going to go through a couple of different examples here. Again, I've got my Terraform block. I've got my required version. We're using this provider here called local. And we are first just going to create a file. It's a local file. This is the name inside of Terraform, just called hello world. The content is going to be hello world. And then my name is going to be out to my path of my module or the Terraform configuration I'm working with. It's going to create another folder called files and then my text file. Right, let me go ahead and bring my shell back up on here. Let's go ahead and let me get into my folder here. TF demo, clear the screen out. So first we need to run Terraform init. It's going to initialize all of our stuff here. It's going to go and download our providers. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Okay, we got some text here. It's successfully initialized. That's always good. Let's scroll back up here and see what it actually did. It's going to go look and initialize my backend. That's where my state file is stored, which right now is going to be on my local system. We'll talk about other places you can store that in other videos. It's then going to go through and find providers or plugins that my configuration needs. In this case, the local provider that I have defined right up here is actually created and maintained by HashiCorp. Since I didn't put a version up here, notice we'll get into versioning of your providers and everything, but since I didn't put any type of version requirements here, went and downloaded the latest version, which is 2.5.3. It's created this lock file here, and it's recording that provider that it downloaded to keep it consistent. I include that in my source control repository, anything like that later on. So if someone else downloads it, they'll get the exact same provider version. We'll look into that a little bit later. But again, initializing here, it is just downloading providers and setting up my Terraform configuration for my next step here, which is going to be Terraform plan. What we want to do is see what this configuration is going to do. We'll go ahead and run plan here. It ran through very quickly because it's just checking my local system here. And don't have to go check a cloud provider or anything, but let's go take a look at what it wants to do. What it's showing here is based on my current resource configuration, we're going to create resources, and that's indicated by this green plus sign here. And here's the resource it's going to create. It's going to create a local file, hello world, and we actually see a lot more things here than what we saw in our Terraform configuration. Here's the content, here's the file name, maybe some directory and file permissions. And it's going to generate some hashes here, and it won't know what those hashes look like until we actually apply and create the resource. And then we're also going to get an ID. This is just identifying the resource inside our configuration here. We won't know that until we create it. And then the other part I want to point out here in our resource definition, again, we have resource local file hello world, but then this is how this resource is going to be identified or stored inside our Terraform state. It's the name of our resource type and provider, along with our alias or canonical name here, local file.hello world. And then we have a summary down here. What is this plan going to do? We're going to add one item. We're not changing anything and we're not destroying anything, which is usually a pretty good thing to do. All right, so let's go ahead and let's run our next command where we do Terraform apply. It's going to go through and do the exact same thing. It's going to show us a plan here of what changes it wants to make. That should match up exactly what we saw with before. And then to ask, do you want to perform these actions? And you have to enter yes to continue past this step here. So let's go ahead and type yes. Very quickly, it's going to go through and show us that it created a resource and it was successful. So it's actually, if we scroll down here, we now see a new folder called files underneath TF demo. If we expand that out and go look at hello world, we see our text file with our text matching the resource that we just created. So, all right, everything's looking good here. We just went through, defined our first resources, planned it, applied it, and we can see, that exists here on our system now. And then finally, if we want to go through, let's do Terraform destroy. Again, it's going to give us something that looks like a plan. It's going to tell us what it's going to do, where it's going to destroy a resource. It's going to list all the resources here. It's changing all these values into null because they're not going to exist anymore. Again, we see the results of our destroy command here. We're not going to add, we're not changing anything. We're destroying one resource. And then, are you sure you really want to do this? Let's go ahead and type yes. And then watch on the left-hand side, our files directory and our text file are going to disappear. I actually ended up keeping the files folder. That's interesting. I guess because the file is the only thing actually technically defined inside of our configuration here. So it just deleted that. All right, so lots of fun there. Let's go ahead and dive into our configuration a little bit more and see some different things that we can do. Now we had our first resource here of just creating a local file, but we have some other things we can play with here. One of them being, let's generate a random file name using the random provider. So let's go ahead and uncomment this. What we have here again is we're defining a resource. It is of a random pet type. This is from the random provider. And then the name of our random pet, we're going to just be assigning it, or we're using it for a file name. So I have just file name here. That's what I'm going to be using it for. It has a couple of different properties. Length is the number of words we're going to use to create our random pet name. And then in between each word, we're going to have a separator of an underscore. Let's go ahead and continue through. Another thing we have here is creating a random integer. Again, we have our resource keyword here. Our provider or our resource type is a random integer, and I'm just calling it integer between the range of 1,000 and 10,000. And now let's create another random file here and comment that. So what we have here is we're going to create another local file, and I'm calling it my random pet file. Our file name is again going to be under our files directory. And in this case, I'm referencing another resource that I created, and we can do that using the full name. So I have random pet.filename right up here. And then one of the properties of this resource is ID. That's going to give us the name that it outputs here, .txt. And then the content of our file is going to be generated by Terraform. Again, we have a reference to another resource we created in the random integer. So we have random integer.integer, and then the result of that integer that it's creating. Now, one thing you can also notice here is these are strings that we're creating here. So they are in double quotes. And if we want to reference another resource, we have to use string interpolation. And you can reference other resources and the results that they output if you put it inside of curly brackets and then a $sign right at the beginning of it. Real quick, I've jumped back out here to the Terraform documentation. I want to talk about the random provider because we just went through and talked about creating my random pet name and a random integer and some of the properties. I want to show you where I'm getting that information from. So if you go to use providers and resources like this in the future, you can go look at the documentation and line up exactly with what you're looking for and how you're trying to use it. So we have the random provider here. If we go under resources, there are lots of different random things that we can create: IDs, integers, passwords, pet names, and everything. Let's go back under random pet. It's going to generate random pet names that are to be used as unique identifiers for other resources. If we scroll down here, it'll give you example usage on how to use it. Here we're creating a random pet name to call a server. And then we are using that to create a server out in AWS using that pet name. You can then go through and it'll show you the schema of it, basically showing what properties you can set on it, the length, the prefix, the separator, and then what are its outputs. In this case, you're going to look at the ID property and then the random pet name that it generated for you. The other one we're using right now is random integer. If we go take a look at that, again, it'll give you an example of it. And if we scroll down, here are the required schema or the required properties you have to define when you go to use it. So you have to tell it the min and max, integer that you want to create, the number, the range that you want to do. You have a couple of different optional ones here. And then read only, this is what it's going to do. The string representation of the integer it creates or the result. Now, what I want to do is flip back over to our code here, and you can see that's where these are coming from. We have random pet name.filename.the and then random integer.integer, and the result of that integer of what you're getting there. All right, let's go ahead and save my configuration here. Let's bring our shell back up, and let's run Terraform plan again. Actually, let's first run Terraform init, and I want to show you something here also. Now, I just introduced code that is using the random provider. So when I reran Terraform init, it's going out and saying, oh, I need to, you've written some code using the random provider here. Let me go down and install that from HashiCorp here. And it installed version 3.7.2. If you ever add providers that you're using inside your configuration, you have to rerun Terraform init. So it will go through and download those providers. All right, let's go ahead and run a Terraform plan here. Again, let's take a look at what it's doing. Now here at the very top, we're creating our hello world file again. Here's the content, here's the file name. We already saw that before, but we've got a couple of more resources we're creating here. Here we have our definition or our result for what we're calling our local file, our random pet file name. Now notice we don't know what the file name or the content is. It says it's known after apply. If we scroll down a little bit further, we can see the output of our random integer and pet name. Now these are also resources. It's going to create them, and Terraform is going to track them for us. We have random integer, but notice we don't know the result yet. It's just showing it's going to create a random integer, but it doesn't know what that random integer is until you actually apply this and it creates it. Same thing for the pet name. We don't know what the ID is going to be. All we know is it's going to be 2 words and it's going to be separated by an underscore. And again, the result of our plan, we're creating 4 resources. It considers these random things that you're creating resources that it will track, but we're not changing or destroying anything. Okay, so let's go ahead. We did that. Let's go ahead and run apply here. Again, showing us the same thing, should be the exact same thing we just saw in our plan. And let's go ahead and create it. And we can see it went through and create all our resources. Now, if we go expand out to files, again, we have our hello world text file. We already created that earlier, and that's great. But now let's take a look at our random pet name file that it created. We can see it created the name pleasant_pup. That's the random pet name that it came up with. That's 2 words long. And if we open this up, we can see our results. It said generated by Terraform, and our random integer that it created was 2587. Let's go back into our main TF. Again, I just want to show our definition here. We have our random pet name file. Again, the name of the file is going to be the random pet name it generated. And then inside the content, we have generated by Terraform, and that is the random integer it generated. Now, this is super easy to see because it created a file and we can immediately see it on our local file system and everything. But what if you wanted to output the random pet names and the random integers that it's created here? We can do that using the output keyword here. Let me go ahead and uncomment this. What we see here is we use the output keyword. We give our output a name. I'm just calling it pet name. And then we have a property value, and this is going to equal random pet name.filename, which is the name of our resource that we defined inside of Terraform. And then we want to output the ID. Same thing for our integer. We want to output the result here. So what does that look like when we do that? I'm going to skip just directly to Terraform apply. I'm going to say yes. And as it ran through and did our configuration, it didn't need to actually change anything because our files and everything already exist. They match our configuration. All we see right here is it outputs it out on the command line what are, random integers and pet names that it created. If we were to go through and destroy this, whoops, let's finish spelling that out. Let's go ahead and say yes, let it delete everything that we just created. And then I want to go through and I'm going to skip the plan. Let's just go straight to apply here. You can notice our outputs are changing, but it doesn't know what our integer or pet name are going to be yet. If we run yes, and it went through and generated different pet names for us. We have Hopeful Firefly and then integer here 4934. And let's go close this out because that file doesn't exist anymore. Hopeful Firefly, it's hard to say, and then 4934. All right, well, that does it for our brief introduction into Terraform here. Pretty straightforward. We're creating a TF file that includes our resource definition names. We're generating some random information here to then put and use for our file names and everything. What I wanted to start out with this specifically because you don't need a cloud provider. You don't need to go spend money in a cloud or anything like that. You can literally get started with Terraform by just creating random files on your local system and then deleting them. It's not going to delete anything that's not defined here inside your Terraform configuration. As we just saw before, if I go run Terraform destroy, I tell it yes, it just went through and deleted those files under that folder. Didn't touch anything else because it doesn't care about anything else. It only cares about what it's defined in its configuration. Hopefully this was useful. If you're just getting started with Terraform, I'd be curious what you're going to be using it for or why you're learning it. Go ahead and leave me a comment below. Maybe I can incorporate something like that in a future video. But in the next coming videos here, I just want to go through some more advanced things, get you started on Terraform, and then we'll take a look at using it with Azure, just creating a small lab environment, which is my final goal here that I want to show everyone. And then that's going to lead into some other videos I have planned in the future. Anyway, again, if you're starting with Terraform, leave me a comment below. What are you going to be using it for? And let's learn some more Terraform. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.